I was a representative for Contra Costa County, the Board of Supervisors, for 4 terms. And I think just about a decade on both ABAG and MTC.
Do you remember what years those were?
Well, let's see, I've been in the legislature for 4 years, so they were 4 years back, 2006, 1996 to 2006.
And was that MTC or ABAG, or you combining both?
They're both about the same time.
Okay.
Actually, they may have been exactly the same time. I think I was on ABAG a little bit longer. So regionalism has always been important to the Bay Area, and it's a unique, I think, metropolitan region in so much that we have very unique geography. We've got a huge body of water and mountains that divide us, probably consistent with that. Politically, it's been a challenge sometimes. I remember a story about Jack Knox when he was a predecessor of mine in the Assembly. When Ronald Reagan first became governor, and Jack went to Reagan and explained to him how hard it was to get the Bay Area to work together. And Reagan said, well, why don't you just treat it as one county? So we've struggled with 9 counties and over 100 cities and a lot of different districts and 5 regional agencies. But out of that has become, I think, a very strong identity for the region, that this is a very unique, not just beautiful place, but an amazingly dynamic place. I think if memory serves me, if we were a state, we'd be the 11th largest state. If we were a country, in terms of an economy, we'd be one of the 25 largest economies. So people forget what a big, dynamic place this is, and with it there becomes challenges.
Now, during your time in the state senate, do you see the benefits of the Bay Area sort of speaking with one voice when necessary?
Actually, in the time I've been up there, we've tried to, and I've been an advocate for this, one of the principal advocates, is take the MTC model of one voice. So MTC was very good at taking one voice to Sacramento, has been, and then one voice to Washington. So we created a Bay Area caucus. When I was in the Assembly, Ira Ruskin was the chair, and now, as of right now, I'm hoping that I will be the chair since Assemblymember Ruskin was termed out. So we do the same thing. We literally took the idea from MTC and brought it to the legislature. Oh, it's very effective. When I was in the Assembly, I was the chair of the Assembly Transportation Committee when then Speaker Nunez brought me into his office and said, we're going to make you chair of the Transportation Committee. He specifically said, we're doing this, but we don't want you to take advantage of Los Angeles. And I said, Mr. Speaker, I won't do that politically because you've instructed me to do that, but the reality is we're more prepared than Los Angeles. And that's true for all the regions, and that speaks well, I think, for both ABAG and MTC and the leaders in both over the decades.
So looking back at MTC's history, which is 40 years in 2011, what are some of the highlights that you see as being real accomplishments there?
Well, in my time at MTC, I'll speak to that. It's just it's happening right now. I mean, for all the challenges of that I spoke of, just to build infrastructure. BART, when I was at MTC, we actually started the process for BART to ring the Bay to the South Bay, which again has been challenged both financially and politically, but I think it'll happen. We have the eastern span of the Bay Bridge, which I think will be will be very complementary historically to the Bay Bridge, the Western Span, and the Golden Gate Bridge. We've got the Caldecott, my region. There are multiple things, Caltrain. So all those things, just getting the projects ready and getting them competitive and getting all the various funding sources have been a real challenge and an accomplishment. And to move this dynamic area, to get people to move, with 8 million people now here and still growing, is a real accomplishment for MTC.
Any other accomplishments over the past 40 years that you want to talk about?
Well, I think one of the things working with under the Clean Air Act, and since I was on the Air District as well, being the largest metropolitan area that consistently has had the cleanest air. I mean, we've benefited because of the weather here, but we've also tried to be very aggressive to be consistent with our constituents wanting to protect the environment and public health. So those things are important, and I think towards the end, trying to plan better, trying to, it's always been a challenge to plan with this kind of both geographic and political challenges, but when SB 375 is very, I think, important piece of legislation that I was happy to co-author with Senator Steinberg, but the Bay Area actually was ahead of that in terms of planning and trying to bring all of the agencies, all the cities and counties to the table to see what the Bay Area would look like in 25 or 30 years.
Now let's look at ABAG's 50-year history. In your mind, what are some of the big accomplishments there?
Well, I think first with ABAG, again, more challenge than MTC because MTC is a metropolitan planning organization required by the federal government and has money. And that is a benefit and has a very specific role in terms from a federal and a state statutory responsibility. ABAG didn't have that benefit, but it was the pioneer in trying to bring all these diverse individuals and counties and cities to the table to start to have a real meaningful discussion about how do each of your jurisdictions actually become part of, hopefully, the gestalt of the Bay Area, that we truly become greater, the sum becoming greater than the total of the parts. So that has been a challenge for ABAG, but it's been the place for people to come to for a myriad of variety, different challenges and topics. I think I'm choosing my words here because I'm not sure if it was always something that was easy, but the Joint Planning Committee, I worked closely with then Senator Tom Torlakson, who I've followed in the Senate, to try to create a statute and worked with staff here to have a place where we would start having a little more specific vision about how we were going to incorporate new people in the next 35 years. We're projected to add another 1 million people in this very dynamic region. How do we do that? And then secondarily, starting a discussion with our partners in the Valley. We started with Supervisor Scott Haggerty was a partner, where we started talking with San Joaquin and Stanislaus about what do we do about the people coming in through the Altamont. Now that was pre-housing bubble burst, but the challenge is still there, that people have to move from the Valley into the Bay Area. So we started talking about the Bay Area as a 9-county region as defined by federal and state law, but then the greater Bay Area being the 19 counties, the 10 counties that surround and touch the Bay Area, whether it's in the South Bay or the North Bay or the East Bay, and what would that look like in the future?
This sort of segues into my next question is, where do you see in the future, where do you see regionalism sort of trending?
Well, I see it very strongly right now as we look at the budget in the state of California, and $28 billion, and waiting and anticipating the former and future governor of California, Jerry Brown, a resident of the Bay Area. He's very clearly indicated that he thinks services should go back to the local level, to the state and city level, but I think part of that is regionalism, and I think transportation, ABAG, and MTC is a good model for that. I've had a lot of discussions with people about using that model to take health and human services and employment services more regionally, including with county administrators here. So in a state that's now rapidly approaching 40 million people, you can't really govern it the way we've governed it in the 50s. You have to diffuse it, and I think a lot of that has to go to the region. And in the Bay Area, it will go to the region. People talk about doing more of an East Coast model where instead of unincorporated communities, you'd have townships. About 20 years ago, SANDAG did a very comprehensive look at how they would change their governing model, and we actually took a trip down to SANDAG, a group of us from ABAG and MTC, to look at that probably about 10 or 15 years ago. And part of what they recommended, which I think is not a bad model for the state, is that you would do away with unincorporated areas, have everything incorporated, and then have the county board in that instance, because it's one county, which makes it easier than the Bay Area with only 3 million people. But you would have them be sort of a regional agency for air and for as purposes of an MPO, which they already do, and then health and human services. So that's sort of the opposite side of unincorporating. But right now, you know, you have a lot of, in the East Bay, for instance, you have a lot of cities that contract with counties for police and public works, for planning services, which I think is a good model for a smaller size city, more efficient.
How is MTCs changing the region's landscape? MTC wanted me to ask you this question. You know, lately or more recently, what they're trying to do is really get people out of their cars and are promoting people using transit or alternate transportation like bicycling pedestrian. Your thoughts on that?
Well, it's something I played a big role in, both when I was here and in the legislature. I've carried bills for that, to that effect. You cannot take the growth projections over the next 30 to 100 years in California and keep the same model we've had since the 50s, where you relied on an internal combustion engine in a car to travel to a home, a single-family detached home. You have to have more options for people. And there has been a lot of resistance to that because the American dream, and we're living through one of the crises of that because of the financial bubble and the crisis in the housing industry on multiple levels. But the challenge was that people felt very strongly that they wanted that home, the American dream. I think in the future the American dream is going to be many things. The home builders told us that demographically, as people get older in the Bay Area, that they would choose on the natural to get out of larger homes and get into condos and apartments, provided you had access to transit, that you could walk, healthcare, and security. Obviously, as you get older, you want healthcare, and you want to be able to know that you can walk outside and go to the grocery store without any physical danger or danger of crime happening. So I think all of that's happening, and mostly it's because of MTC and ABAG that is happening, and the outreach they've done to communities to make communities realize that you can have higher density and still make it be very livable. The old joke in planning in California that's often been told is the two things that Californians absolutely won't take are sprawl and higher density. Well, therein lies the challenge. I mean, that's what SB 375 was all about. It's about climate change and getting the tons we need to protect the climate and adhere to AB 32 from land use, which was a huge challenge. But it's not just about that. It's about affordable housing. It's about vibrant communities. It's about communities that have diversity on multiple levels, architecture, planning, as well as the human diversity that we already have in the Bay Area, but unfortunately it's still segregated. So when that all comes to fruition, which we're in the process of doing, my hope is that as beautiful and dynamic as the Bay Area is, it will become even more so for our children and our grandchildren.